Okay, the next application is item number 6. It's an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Brooklyn. It's 220 Carlton Avenue, located within the Fort Greene Historic District. It's docket number 166343, an Italianate-style row house designed by John Doherty and built in 1863-64. The application is to alter the rear facade and construct a rear yard addition.
Good morning, Vickers Money Preservation staff. This application is to alter the rear facade, which is non-visible, and also construct a rear addition with a deck. This is the existing facade here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Christine Walliser, and I'm the project designer here representing the as Victor introduced, the project proposal is to modify the rear facade. Currently, the rear facade is a brick facade, which is deteriorating. So it's deteriorating beyond repair as it stands. The upper 2 floors are buckling, and the lower floor has significant water damage. So we're proposing that the rear facade come down. Currently, as you can see, there's no significant architectural features on the rear. There's a thorough coating across the rear brick as it stands, a thorough coating of acrylic painted white. The first floor windows are bricked up from their original conditions where the stone sills were. And it's adjacent to 220 Carlton over here, which has an approximately 25-foot full 4-story extension just adjacent to it. So one of the things that we're looking to do, besides reconstructing the rear facade in brick again, is also trying to allow a little bit of light to come into the rear of the building. So the proposal would be to include new casement windows with the same dimension and location as the existing windows, a new bay extension on the first floor, and a new deck extension on the first floor with a staircase coming down, and then a slight enlargement of the second story window over here. This area over here would be 2 sets of French doors, and then a new door, a new patio door over here onto the deck, and new French windows over here on the bay extension, and then a slight enlargement of the door and the windows on the ground floor, which would be a tenant unit. So for the rear facade, the next couple of slides will show the existing conditions, context, proposed works, design materials, floor plans, and sections. So as described, the rear facade is sort of a piece of work right now. Everything's been coated over. There are aluminum double-hung windows and square brick mold across the back. There's the original dog-tooth brick cornice is missing, and then there's brick infill on the first floor. 220 Carlton is located on Carlton Avenue on the west side, between Willoughby Avenue and DeKalb Avenue. So it's hatched in right here. As you can see, the rear facade is not visible from any public thoroughfare whatsoever, only visible from the rear yards of the neighboring buildings. There are numerous, hatched in here are all of the buildings which have some form of rear enlargements or extensions on them. Oftentimes these are between 1 and 3 or 4-story extensions that go quite beyond the modest bay extension that we're proposing for 220. So in terms of visibility, here are some photographs from around the block, which basically show lines of sight. So from the front, the rear yard is not visible, even from some of these dip-ins over here, and breaks in the building line. None of the rear facade is visible. So this shows 220 again with its neighboring buildings. 216 over here has an extension. 218 is currently under construction. So this shows buildings north. This is 216, and then 214 over here has a significant, approximately 20-foot extension as well, which is 3 stories high. And south, there's a lot of fences and more extension over here. This shows towards the west side, the southwest, and the northwest. and then more extensions from these buildings over here. So for the proposed work, for the basement, we're doing a large combined window openings and new windows. The first floor would be a new bay window, which would extend out about 4 feet. New combustible, non-combustible deck, stair yard to the deck, to the yard. Wood patio door, divided steel windows, unpainted brick throughout. Second floor, new windows, restored unpainted brick. Third floor, new wood casement windows, 2 over 2, and a new cornice. So this shows the existing conditions for the rear facade, and then the approximate delineation for the new openings that we're proposing. This is a material palette in here, so we're proposing natural brick, dark historical paint for the windows, steel windows just for the bay extension and the French doors above, and then the rest of them would all be wood. Wood siding for the bay, and dark wood windows. So here again we have the rear facade proposal, describing the windows and the operation of them, and what we're planning for the interior openings. It was important to us to both bring light into the building as well as keep a contextual use brick throughout.
Okay. Is there anything more?
No, just
Okay.
through the floor plans to show the dimensions of things.
Okay. Are there questions? Yes, Michael?
Have you done removal tests for the thorough seal yet?
No, we haven't done a removal test for the thorough putting on.
Yeah.
No, we haven't, because basically the rear wall is so deteriorated, the brick on
Okay.
the interior and the exterior is crumbling and sort of I would almost call it
It's nearly impossible to remove from brick masonry without destroying the brick. I mean,
Yeah,
even
that's an
abrasive blasting, it is become so uncontrollable that you may end up changing your approach to the brick masonry and replacing it if you try and get that thorough seal off. I don't
Oh,
know,
the
just,
proposal, the proposal is to replace.
oh, okay.
Oh, okay, yeah, that was, sounded like you're,
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Apologies. Restore it to a historical.
yeah,
context.
that's,
Okay. Any other questions? We take public testimony. Barbara Zay.
Barbara Zay of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds this rear yard addition to be too heavy an intervention. The proposed window and door openings are quite busy in their variety, appearing as if there are multiple ideas and designs being attempted at once. The retention of more of the existing windows would help this rear facade to be more understated and appropriate. Thank you.
Are there any more speakers on the item? Okay. Comments?
So which windows are the steel windows and which are?
The ones which are the bay.
Steel, what's wood?
Yeah.
The steel
steel.
windows we're proposing are for the bay and the French doors above, and the idea here is that sort of the bay and the windows above would let more light in. They'd be called out as the steel windows to kind of integrate the outside in, bring the garden in, make it feel appropriate, and that they're divided lights, but that there are narrow sight lines for the windows. And then all of the rest of them, which are maintaining the dimension and location for the upper floors, and below would be wood windows.
But up above, everything else is wood, except those two.
Those two, yeah, the French door bays.
Yes, John?
Now, my understanding is that this can't be seen from any street, anywhere, correct?
Correct.
Right, okay. So then my question for you is, then what's our standard? If it can't be seen, what are we trying to control here? I mean, how much of the, is there a certain level of the building that we care more about than another level of the building? Are we changing openings? We care about that if nobody can see this thing?
Right. I mean, it's I think, interesting how sort of historically the commission has looked at rear yard changes and whether they come before the commission or through rules. But I'm going to let Jared, do you want to just speak to this issue?
Well, I think that one of the
That's
most
the
important
before
things over the years is that the top floor is being maintained, those punched windows are staying, the addition doesn't project beyond others. It's, it's not, I mean, one could approve a full width as well. I think that the memory of punched window openings, perhaps the materials are, appropriate for a building of this scale.
But is there, because this is just essentially, it's just facade work, right? So is it I mean, it's a question, I agree. Yeah. Diana?
I was just going to mention that other issues we've looked at is if you have a very intact back row, and there's very, very little intervention, then, less intervention might be, what we might look at. We've certainly allowed a lot of glass, and, that's as people are moving to look for a more open back. We've looked at things like the impact on the donut, how far is this addition intruding, that kind of thing. But in terms of, I think, the architectural approach, except for the upper floor and except in cases where you have a very intact row, I think we've allowed a lot of latitude in, but, sometimes we might say, an addition looks very awkward or something, and there might have been some recommendations made about the design, but, so it's fairly, I'd say there are few areas in which we've been expecting an applicant to just keep to, let's say, an original design or something. That's unusual.
So here,
It's an
where we're...
interesting question, because I
Yes.
think that, there also there was some evolution. At one time, things could be done at the rear that they could be done at staff level, weren't in fact shown to the commission. But there was a period where, and this is my understanding, that more and more rear yard additions were taking place and more rooftop additions were going to take place. And the commission started hearing about that and then changed the rules because it was really about looking at the amount of intervention that you have in the rear, and how much that takes away from the historic fabric. But I think in a case like this, I would say it's to me, it seems that when you have facade changes and they're not really taking sort of significant historic features away, then perhaps this is something, and this is not even enlargement, could be done at staff level.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any issues with what they're proposing over here because it's not
Yeah.
visible, and we've allowed a lot more glass and other, and mix of materials as well.
So here, we're restoring original materials to the back of the building, and in terms, that is not restoring original materials, but more, making it look more like it did originally. There's no rooftop accretion, there is no visibility from the street. We're for the most part, leaving the top windows intact. We're replacing windows that were essentially your aluminum replacement windows. It seems to me this is perfectly fine.
Yes, and I just want to read into the record that, the notes that have got that Community Board 2 recommends approval, but they say, but discuss necessity of removing so much historic fabric and appropriateness of cedar siding. Okay, that was the Community Board's comment.
I do want to say, though, that I don't understand the design logic of the rear facade. So, I mean, on some level, I think I agree, by the way, with John's questions about the extent to which we should have authority or say, or even discussion about these unseen backyards. But since we're looking at it, there was a certain kind of rhythm or system or quiet in the existing. And now, as I mentioned, I don't understand the design logic or order. What that does, though, is it produces a kind of interesting vernacular-looking effect here, which is why everyone's not terribly off-put by it. It kind of could have happened over time or something. But that in itself is a kind of a strange approach, too. I mean, I'm not sure why it is that that's better than, let's say, a very a sort of a dominant, as glazed or designed approach. So I'm not sure, because I don't understand the design approach
Right.
here.
But I would say this, that, again, sometimes we don't understand the choices that people make, and they may be aesthetic, they may be practical. I think the question for us is whether the changes they're proposing is appropriate. And so, and it's not necessarily what is better, which is why don't you take a more radical approach and do everything modern, or
Right, and what I'm saying here is that the issue of appropriateness may have to do with aligning or remembering the very somber order that existed on this rear facade, that this new design does not reinforce or engage. I mean, it seems to take it apart entirely, right? The kind of equal windows, dimensioned windows on the top. Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, I see this as actually fairly modest changes that they're making. And that I think what you said was sort of a vernacular, that this happened over time, but that's sort of almost organic, and it's not necessarily, I mean, I could find that appropriate.
Right, but it's not. Sorry, just speak to that. I think it's a really valid question, and I think in this case, one of the aspects of sort of the vernacular, accretion of design moves in here actually had to do with the mitigating factor of there's an enormous 50-year-old cherry tree in the rear yard, which has a root system which is spread out. So, whereas we might have originally wanted to put the deck staircase to the left, would have basically required that we had cut down the tree. So certain things were shifted to the right, and because of that, the foundation wall, the windows had to be moved to the left. So that somberness that you speak of, or that sort of, very clear-cut, rigorous design approach in this case was hampered by things that the clients thought were important to the site, didn't want to take down some of the trees in the rear yard, so things were shifted and adjusted accordingly.
To me, the bigger picture might be that there is no one way of doing this, and no one way that the commission should ever embrace. I can't think of all the number of West Village townhouses that have accretions over time that, in the new spiffiness of the West Village and of their clientele, we see very sophisticated architects come in and make very sophisticated, very big changes that rationalize everything, and almost to the degradation sometimes, but we allow it, partly because it's in the back. So, I mean, one size doesn't fit all. This is what this client and this architect have chosen, and it's not visible, and to me, that's part of the the freedom of owning a house and being able to kind of do somewhat what you want with it, even in a historic district. So but I had the same thought, that this feels like an accretion over time, although it isn't. And so, some of the testimony from HDC also knocked it a bit because of that. But I think there's an irony in it as well.
But I mean, how would you characterize the Italianate quality of this existing rear facade? I mean, it's the whole building is Italianate in style. So how to characterize? I mean, I use the word somber or symmetrical or something. But Michael Devonshire, somebody.
I just think that the commission has historically noted that some of these changes are appropriate because they're not visible. And I think that's sort of a concept that the commission has used. So I think sometimes that idea that if it's not visible, we see it all the time. We've allowed rooftop additions so that they're not visible. They have more freedom in doing what they want because it's not visible. And this is similar. This is not visible. So I think one can probe these questions, but I'm not sure it's necessary to do that.
Then the question of appropriateness is moot because they're not visible.
Right, and it's something that maybe shouldn't be coming before the commission. It's a question. All right, so what do we think about this? I don't have any concerns about it. Okay. All right, so we're okay with this, we can move to decision. Okay, close the hearing. Kim, do you want to read that? Michael?
In the matter of 220 Carlton Avenue in the Fort Greene Historic District, an application to alter the rear facade and construct a rear yard addition, noting that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Fort Greene Historic District, I recommend approval, finding that the proposed rear yard addition and rear facade alterations will not be visible from any public thoroughfare, that the rear of the building has no significant architectural features which would be lost or damaged by the construction of the proposed rear yard addition or the rear facade alterations, that the proposed rear yard addition will not rise to the full height of the building and will maintain a sense of the building's original volume, that the modest scale and simple massing of the proposed rear yard addition will maintain the central green space and the building's relationship with other buildings in the row, that the design and treatment of the proposed rear yard addition and modified openings featuring wood cladding and metal and clear glass window and door assemblies will utilize traditional materials and maintain a division of floor levels that will be in keeping with the materials palette and residential scale of the building, that the fenestration pattern of the top floor will be maintained in the reconstruction of the deteriorated rear facade, preserving the building's relationship with the row, that the proposed metal deck and terrace above the addition are in keeping with the other rear yard decks and terraces found on buildings of this age and type throughout the historic district, and the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the building or the Fort Greene Historic District.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This application's been approved.